Questions about the 12 recommendations. Billy E. A. Meier's oral explanations of the 12 recommendations excerpt from the conversation with Michael Voigtländer on June 4, 2025.
With regard to the given 12 recommendations, it should now be explained in more detail in a responsible and brief way what these recommendations actually contain as a whole, what they basically mean and what they are to be understood as, and how everything is really to be understood from them.
Connection to the given recommendations.
Faith means a confusion of chaos, of fear and darkness, of truth, of lies and deceit, of confusion and destruction. Faith includes enmity, war, death and murder, through hostility to religion, as the Hitler War proved. And through the program of faith, superstitions of many different kinds have also been evident since time immemorial, such as devil cults, witch hunts, witch burnings and other witch executions, as is still common in certain African countries and in India, etc. But other evil and wicked religious cults also claim human lives in cruel ways, with torture leading to death, as was common in religious wars in earlier times. And the characteristics of religions and their beliefs and programs have not only left their mark on all Earth humans over the centuries, but have also been preserved for humanity to remember through written traditions. The connection to the horrors of religious faith is still made today by seeing and hearing what Hitler's World War brought upon Earth humans, whereby Judaism in particular was to be exterminated, and this caused the death of many millions of human lives. But that was not enough, because the persecution of religion in the Gaza region and in the Middle East was continued by the Israeli mass murderer and his army murder organization, because just as in Hitler's World War, the whole thing is nothing other than a murderous religious war by the Jewish mass murderer Netanyahu, who is waging a genocidal war against the Arabs who believe in Islam in the Gaza region, in Lebanon, in Persia, and partly also in Syria, and finally now also in Yemen. Consequently, as far as faith in religious form is concerned, and as has been the case since time immemorial through war, murder and manslaughter, bringing misery, and also destruction, this humanity-stultifying achievement continues to rage en masse, so that this absolutely devastating death virus clings to Earth humans to this day. The last World War, which Adolf Hitler staged and which claimed well over 70 million human lives, and only served to exterminate the Jews, which was basically a religious war, is now being repeated by order of the Israeli mass murderer and his military, for which America is also supplying large quantities of weapons to Zelensky, the Jewish president of Ukraine. In this regard, it seems that in this criminal way, reparations are to be made to the Jewish people for the murders committed during Hitler's World War, which the majority of the Jewish people in Israel and in the world do not want. However, the whole thing leads to the Jews being hated and harassed again, even though they want nothing to do with the actions of the mass murderer Netanyahu and his murderous army. But their anti-war voices go unheard. It was the same at the time when Emmanuel was supposedly nailed to a cross, because it was in fact only the top brass, all of the high religious elite, who were effectively the culprits, as they are also now, and the hangers-on of the mass murderer and his army. But I think that the time has come to say what really happened when Emmanuel was to be executed. As I've mentioned before, it was not a cross that he was tied and nailed to, because this tale of the cross only came about 300 years after the events in Jerusalem. Emmanuel was tied to a Y-shaped execution stake, if I may say so, and nailed with 4 nails through the hands and heels of the feet. The execution stake was a Y-shaped olive tree trunk, only about 3.5 meters long, to which Emmanuel was tied and additionally nailed, in order to die a slow and agonizing death from the very bad torture wounds he had suffered and as a result of dehydration through thirst. The trunk was supported from behind, with 2 further pieces of trunk driven diagonally into the ground to give the Y-shaped execution trunk upright support. The whole execution procedure was not somehow recorded in writing, as it was not until more than 100 years later that a scribe imaginatively wrote down a tradition, after which numerous rewrites were also made over the decades, and the names of former disciples, who truly had no knowledge of writing, were given as authors. This is how mendacious Christianity came into being, as well as its sects and horrendous superstitions, such as witchcraft and religious wars, etc., which has claimed many millions of human lives over the course of around 2027 years, and still claims many victims today through the Christian delusion and its witchcraft, as is still the case today in India and in various African countries, as well as in the civilized world, in Europe and America, through well-known fanatical Christian sects, which is, of course, vehemently denied and also not punished. The disputing of reality and its truth, as is happening with a crazy and fickle as well as despotic dictatorial US President Trump trample, contributes to the fact that many human beings, out of fear and cowardice, go along with the dictator's words instead of standing up to him and stopping his desire for world domination. But the elements of the world's various governments, as usual, just keep their big mouths shut, cower and let the madman have his way as he increasingly begins to impose his reason, so that his party comrades and the Supreme Court also cowardly agree with his insane ideas, endorse them and affirmatively correspond to everything he does that is crazy and will sooner or later destroy America. Something that encourages many rulers of other states to do the same, but against which the populations do not rebel in any wise, but indifferently and irresponsibly let everything happen, and allow themselves to be bogged down without doing anything about it. This is the case in Germany and in practically all states belonging to the EU dictatorship, with which the Swiss government is also testamachtet from the people, illegally and without their electoral permission. Just as urgently needed federal funding is being cancelled, or is to be cancelled in order to promote and support biodiversity, nature conservation and climate protection, which are urgently needed for all life. Instead, however, the federal government is squandering taxpayers' money on motorways and other nonsense, but not on what is necessary to preserve and promote nature and all its fauna and flora, which are essential to life. This is also the case in many other countries around the world, where these are used as rubbish dumps in poorer countries where diseases are spread and areas are made uninhabitable, despite the rapidly increasing overpopulation. The seeing and hearing that is indifferently and irresponsibly received by the rulers of all the states of the world and by the followers of these rulers from the peoples, all of whom are completely indifferent to the chaos and injustice as well as the whole murderous warfare, especially in America, where a dictator is now tolerated and supported, who is terrorizing the whole world, and in Europe the EU dictatorship, which has dragged an absolutely unfree community under its rule and its nails, which lowly intelligent and simple-minded people have joined this dictatorship. And lowly intelligent and simple-minded Swiss people also want to do so, in addition to their idiotic and criminal airs and graces, to seek the proximity of NATO. The bulk of human beings are constantly creating more and more chaos, and at the same time causing more and more mischief and turning away more and more from the creational order that human beings are fundamentally capable of, but which they disregard and are guilty of disregarding. This chaos of mass humanity has many faces, such as ignorance, disregard for reality and thus disregard for truth, relationship problems, violence, abused sexuality, hunger, sweaty labor, worry and pain, as well as despotism and the associated oppression, greed, restlessness, dissatisfaction, illness, lost dignity, insatiability, threats and limitations, terrible forces of nature and unfulfilled desires, corruption, loss of meaning, importance and vocation, hardship and misery, grief, plague and death, etc. These are the daily events and occurrences that manifest themselves in the lives of the majority of human beings on Earth, humans. On this basis, human beings are completely exposed to their own endeavors to guide and lead themselves in such a way that they are spared and not exposed to such precipitations, and can therefore walk along daily with a good conscience, and do not have to hide from their fellow human beings, because they do not have a good conscience towards them and have always hidden from them. If human beings do not want to let go of their bad and evil habits, and do not want to let go of them, then they inevitably choose chaos and remain mired in it. This makes him guilty for himself, whereby he inevitably remains incapable of finding and doing the correct thing in order to recognize his being and bring order to it and correspond to it. The human being thus aligns himself in a negative wise because he cannot let his own light shine within him and also cannot bring it into the world. Consequently, he lives in perpetual darkness with regard to himself and never finds the light of self-knowledge and becoming himself. For everything he also does is directed against himself, because he does not rely on himself, but on a sham thinking and on a faith that is usually hopefully related to an imaginary helpful God, but not to a healthy and valuable self-thinking and self-help. The person who indulges in a belief and is not a real self-thinker creates evil for himself, shies away from letting the light within himself shine, and thus remains in the dark about himself, as a result of which no one can see his own shameful deeds of faith and illusory thinking. When a human being becomes self-aware and frees himself from every belief, then he becomes exclusively a liberator of himself, and no longer allows himself to be tied down. For he experiences that he can use his energy and might in his life and break free from his chaos and his self-darkness. For then he knows that he himself determines his life and his weal and woe. And he knows that faith is only a lie, which dominates the majority of humanity and the world. And he knows that life is not given by a God, but is naturally created, that no rebirth can be expected, and that reality and its truth is more powerful than all the faith and all the temptations of this world. And it is only as a result of reality and its truth that human beings can live and lead their lives, just as it is also only through reality and its truth that they can judge, finalize, overcome and conquer everything, but not through faith. The word of reality and its truth might make the difference between what is now and what will later become and be, but if a human being is already willing to be and or become what he should be, then he will succeed in many things that he will never find through faith. If he lives according to reality and its truth, then he will experience, learn, and also see how, what, and who he really is. From birth to the completion of life, life has many trials in its program. Consequently, the human being should also form his character of rightness, and thus increasingly have to prove himself in life, whereby he can also call himself happy and pass the tests of existence, and thus always remain steadfast. If the human being remains himself, he will remain strong in life and will reap many fruits in many relationships. But if he separates himself from reality and its truth, he will never be able to achieve anything of real value. Many aspects of the order can become effective reality through reality and its truth, while other elements, such as aging or any genetic damage or death, belong to the order of creation and cannot be changed. This is because the human being, like all life in general, is subject to transience, but is given creation energy which continues to exist and creates new life again.
With that, dear friend, I have actually said everything I wanted to say.